Welcome to the Peer Review Podcast, Fulfillment and Creativity in Academia. I'm Mira Sukharov, and together with my friend and colleague Sarah Bunin-Benor, in each episode, we are in conversation with fellow scholars and other experts on topics related to finding meaning and fulfillment in academia. Today, it's my great pleasure to be here with Joel Westheimer, who is a professor in the Faculty of Education at University of Ottawa, where he was also a former university research chair in democracy and education. He's also an education columnist for CBC Radio's Ottawa Morning Show. He is an elected member of the U.S. National Academy of Education and a fellow of the American Educational Research Association. Westheimer's latest book is the second edition of What Kind of Citizen? Educating Our Children for the Common Good. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you, Mira. It's great to be talking with you.
Likewise, and it's really my privilege to be a good friend of Joel's. And so we vent a lot to each other and share a lot about the trials and tribulations of academia. But I'm excited to be more pointed this time in my questions to you so I can really reflect again with you on this wacky and wonderful and maddening career of ours.
Yeah,
So
this conversation has come up a lot informally, but it'll be fun to talk about it on this podcast because so many of us talk about it. And of course, so many outside of academia don't really understand what academic life is. And so this is great.
exactly, but we have to decide whether we're going to let them listen to it because we need as much sympathy as we can get, right? We'll see how
Yes.
it goes. Okay, Joel, tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are in academia. First of all, you're a New Yorker through and through, but here you are living down the street from me in Ottawa. So tell us a bit about your career trajectory and how you fell into or landed in education, because you majored in something quite different in undergrad.
I did. My career trajectory has been quite peripatetic. So it's kind of a funny story. I majored in electrical engineering and computer science. No one would believe this, and in fact, even while I was majoring in it, no one believed it at Princeton University. They thought I was in political science or drama or English or all kinds
And
of
did
things.
did you even own your own computer yet?
No, no one owned their own
Yeah,
computer.
yeah.
In fact, I mean, word processing came in while I was partway through university. And I remember they had this thing at some point, this thing came out, which what you did it from a terminal and there was a mainframe
Okay.
computer. No one had their own
Mhm.
computer. And I remember at some point they had this thing called power typing. And power typing meant that you could just keep typing and not have to hit return. Anyway, I did work in programming for a little while, and my career goal there was sort of it always was technology in social service, like in the service of something about the common good, like is in the title of my book. But I got bored with that pretty quickly, and it didn't pan out the way I wanted it to. And at the time, I went on a trip with a couple of friends cross country in a van. And somehow over that trip, I realized that I'd always loved working with children. And we could talk about that if there's time. But
Sure.
I realized when I came back that I wanted to go into teaching. I had never
Mhm.
considered that a career. And I taught in the New York City public schools for several
Mhm.
years. And I was teaching on something called an emergency credential. And it meant that I eventually had to do a master's degree to continue teaching and get my full teaching license. And so I decided to do that all in one shot rather than do it like in evenings or something. And
Mhm.
so I went to Stanford and did my MA. And while I was doing that, I loved it. And while I was doing it, someone suggested that I go on for the PhD. And
Mhm.
I never planned this career out. Like I never even thought like, okay, I'll spend the next 5 years of my life doing a PhD. I just thought,
Mhm.
yeah, that sounds good for September.
Little did you know.
Exactly. So I did this PhD in education and realized that I was always intending to go back to the K-12 classroom, but I decided that I really liked working with adults, with teachers, and with people going into education as a field, and thus started my academic career.
Mm. And there's one more little factoid that I think is worth adding is that remind me, you were the first man at Princeton to minor in something
Yeah,
not very typical for men in those days.
this is why you can tell I was all over the place. I was the first man at Princeton and certainly the first engineering student who minored in women's studies. And so
Wow.
I became the first male graduate from the women's studies certificate, and I still have that certificate.
Fantastic. So obviously your interests and talents are broad, which serves you well, I think, for a career that is itself so broad in the kinds of things we have to do and can choose to do. So let's just say in research, teaching, and service, where have you found the most passion? But we'll
Uh,
talk about a lot of all three. But if I was to ask you to begin with one.
Yeah. I'm curious whether any of your guests answer service to that question, but that's another.
Well, then let's start with service. So for the non-academics who are listening, right, there's three major components of our job: teaching, research, and service. And service is something we sort of have to do, and yet we're not necessarily rewarded for it, nor are we necessarily really punished for not doing it well enough. So it sits in this awkward in between. It's kind of like loading the dishwasher, right? Something that has to get done, although it's important work.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so your non-academic listeners know generally across
Mhm.
universities, your job is considered sort of 40% research, 40% teaching, 20% service, but that kind of varies a lot too. Obviously, there's
Right.
times when you're doing all service. And so the thing that is good, I agree with everything you just said, and it's generally things that people get dragged into kicking and screaming.
Mhm.
Um, but something I love about it is the people-oriented aspect of it.
Mhm.
Like generally, when you're doing service, you're on committees, which is not always fantastic, but you're working with people sometimes across the whole university. You're interacting, depending on what you're doing, you're interacting with other professors, with students, with administrators. And that's something that I'm probably jumping ahead with your questions, but that's something that is a challenge for me anyway in the rest of our work. In research in particular, it can be a very solitary work. And even teaching, sure, when you're in the classroom, it's very dynamic, but you're often also staring at your computer alone in many components of our job. And probably we should be talking about the great things about our job first, but I'll tell you that that's
Mhm.
always been something that has been a negative aspect to our jobs is the I'm very social, and so the aspect of it that is isolating is challenging.
Yeah, and you know that I relate to that too, which is partly why we love to meet for coffee and pretend to get our work done while we're doing
Exactly.
that in Ottawa's.
We're lucky
Um,
we're lucky to be able to work in cafes a lot. I mean, I'll say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to follow up on the point you were making about solitude, and that in a sense it isn't necessarily lonely being in the university classroom, but in a sense it is very lonely because of the power hierarchy. I mean, I'm always worried that
Yeah.
students are evaluating me, judging me. Am I being funny enough? Am I being entertaining enough? Am I being interesting enough? Am I going to get good
Yeah.
teaching evaluations? And this is all after tenure. You and I are both tenured. We both have full professor ranking. So our teaching evaluations don't mean a whole lot materially, but I think they still matter. You care, I care.
Yeah.
And so it can be almost strangely isolating, even though we could be in a room with hundreds of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree with that, Mira, because you're sort of in charge and you're responsible. It's not the same as going to a job and working on a collective project with others, that
Hmm.
you're doing it. It's sort of your project. And of course, we work with students cooperatively and we like to be collaborative and everything, but there is a sense where at the end of the day, it's your show, and that
Hmm.
that can be I totally get with that can be isolating too, for sure.
And some of my colleagues in the States, they get to co-teach courses, even very small courses. They have kind of, in some senses, it feels like an unlimited teaching budget for staffing their classrooms at the
Yeah.
places I'm thinking of. And I would love to get that happening a bit more here. I don't know if you ever have had that opportunity, but it would probably cost our deans double, but maybe it would be worth teaching double just to have that camaraderie and that
Yeah.
creative
I
back and
I
forth.
think I know. I've only had small opportunities to do that. I mean, I was at NYU for 6 years, and that I had an occasional opportunity to do it. Not a full course co-teaching, but little, certain classes. But all this said, the energy of the classroom and the connections you do have with students are just some of the favorite parts of my job. And the variety, that we get to do those three things that you said, the teaching, research, and service. There's just so much variety that it does make me think that it's kind of like the best job in the world in a lot of
Hmm.
ways.
Absolutely. Um, Joel, you mentioned NYU, and I wanted to ask you about a certain episode in your life. They talk about with journalists that journalists have to be careful not to become the story. And in your case, you are a renowned expert on civic education, democracy, being an engaged citizen. And here you, in a sense, became the story for a short period in a very contentious area regarding that. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened at NYU? And this, of course, this is public record. People can read about it, but tell us in your words.
Yeah, it's a good allusion to this, and I'll
Mhm.
I'll try and do it not too long. But it was certainly a big event in my life. And what happened is that I was asked to testify while I was at NYU. I was asked by the graduate student union, although they weren't a union yet, to testify before the National Labor Relations Board, which in the US adjudicates issues of labor and so forth, because the students didn't at a private university did not have the right to form a union. And they were challenging this law, and it was a precedent-setting case. And as you said, it became a huge case. People can look it up in the New York Times and in the Chronicle of Higher Ed and all over, because it was a precedent-setting case. And what happened was, after I testified, I thought it's no big deal. I did actually check with the vice dean and several other people, like, is this a problem? Because I didn't have tenure yet. Um, and they said, no, absolutely not a problem, not a problem. And shortly after, I had gotten all of, like, the highest reviews in my scholarship and my teaching, and I could go on with it, but, like, the funniest thing is, well, I'll tell you in a minute. Um, I was told that I was rejected for tenure, and this
Mm.
happened just a few months after I testified. Well, oh, by the way, when I testified, I thought it was going to be the most boring thing in the world, and it turned out to be like an episode of Law and Order. There were
Oh,
like
wow.
there were like seven lawyers for the university there, and deans and the vice provost of the university. I mean, it was unbelievable, and they just kept screaming that I had, no grounds to be testifying, and it was quite dramatic.
Wow.
And so it became a national case, not because I filed a suit, but because the parent union that was, kind of sponsoring the graduate student union, which was the UAW, filed a case, and basically, through the NLRB, sued the university. And the way the NLRB works is they decide to take on a case. If they do, it becomes the US government against the university. And so the US government basically was you know, the equivalent of suing the university for political retaliation, and not giving me tenure for those reasons. I wrote about this in an article that I quite like called "Tenure Denied," because
Mm.
it's like you said, that the journalist becomes the story, but I link it to broader issues about the corporatization of the university, and union busting in
Mhm.
the university. So I'm happy to report that um, the graduate students did eventually win. Then the NLRB, different people were appointed to the NLRB, and the case was overturned. And then they won again. And now private university graduate students have the right to unionize.
Oh, great. So there was a victory for in the overall case. And what about your personal, the personal outcome for you?
Well, this is crazy. I mean, as you can imagine, it's impossible for this kind of stuff not to get under your skin. And so
Hmm.
it gets under your skin. I mean,
Hmm.
by the way, my faculty in my department unanimously voted to grant me tenure. And so it was
Hmm.
overturned and higher up, at the dean's level and the provost level. Um,
Right.
but I don't think I would have gotten nearly as much attention for my career if it weren't for this case, because
Oh, wow.
it became, the people nationally and internationally who
Hmm.
came to my defense was just incredible. The
Hmm.
biggest educational research association, something like five past presidents of that association. This is an association representing some 20,000 professors.
Wow.
Signed a letter to the university saying that political retaliation was
Hmm.
outrageous and that they should reinstate my tenure. Um,
Hmm.
so I think a lot more people ended up knowing my name than they would
Hmm.
have before. And also, as you said, because I write about democracy and education, this became a little sub part of my writing and research, which was
Hmm.
democracy in the university and collegial governance. And so I did a
Hmm.
lot of speaking and some writing on that topic. So all in all, when I look back, I have to say it was probably a good thing, even though it was a very trying time at the time.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I should add that, things were very bad for NYU. They were being raked over the coals in the press, and there was not good press for them with this suit. But they, of course, would have appealed any initiative. And so at some point, I decided to settle, and they settled because I didn't want this to become my life, and this would go on for 10 years, with appeals and stuff. So it worked out well for me and not so great for them, but it settled, and that was it. And the NLRB went along with that too.
Mhm. And getting that settlement, getting just some sort of sum of money must have felt a bit vindicating.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
because it, was a lot of pain, even though I got so much support, it was.
Yeah, I get it.
In addition, as you
Mhm.
know, my wife Barbara was
Mhm.
here in Ottawa because she teaches at Carleton where you teach, and
Mhm.
we were doing a long distance thing. So this provided an opportunity for me to jump ship and take a job in Ottawa at the University of Ottawa.
Right, right. So sometimes the two body problem, as we talk about it in academia, where it sometimes can be very hard to coordinate work, life, marriage, partnership when you're both academics, and you guys have
Yeah,
eventually made it work very well.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, I did want to add that I said the old adage is that the journalist shouldn't become the story, but I actually don't really agree with that when it comes to academics, and because in my own work, and as you've said a little bit with yours, that I value bringing in the academics experience, our own subjectivity, our vantage point. I think there's a lot in our research that can be enriched by our own perspectives and bringing those in explicitly. One of the things that you've done to overcome this dilemma of academic solitude is you've had some very long-standing academic friendship collaborations. Tell us a little bit about those.
yeah. Um, that's right, and I think you do that as well. And many of us enjoy collaborative projects, working with colleagues on a project, also with a group of students as research
Mhm.
assistants. But the key thing is with other colleagues. And one in particular, my colleague Joe Kahn, who's at the University of California, Riverside now. Um, we met in grad school and
Mm,
um, published articles together in grad school. We became
wow.
fast friends, and we've been working together for decades now. And it's a really special friendship and collegial relationship. And there's others I've worked with in that way. Joe stands out, but I did just finish a big project on what teachers teach about economic inequality, and that was done with a colleague, John Rogers at UCLA. And Joe was an advisor on that project. And, John and I had a team of RAs in each university, and we would have video conference meetings. and with everyone, and it was really nice, and it was nice for the students too because they met students from another university and another country in this case.
Mhm.
And so I've definitely put a priority on that, but I would like to do that even more
Mhm.
because the collaboration I think is really, really rewarding.
When Google Docs was invented, or at least when it arrived to my attention,
Yeah.
I was in the middle of a collaboration with someone years ago, and he was on the doc, and I was on the doc at the same time. And I was thinking, this is the most exciting thing I've ever seen. That two people can be writing on the same doc, and my cursor was flying all over, and his cursors there until he
Yeah.
sent me a message saying, I can't concentrate when your cursor is flying around. Can you give me a minute? And I was so hurt. And then about a couple of years later, I was talking to another academic friend, and she just finished a book with yet another colleague. And apparently, they loved being on the same doc at the same time. And I'm thinking, wow, introduce me to that person. So,
Yeah.
people have all these different temperaments, and that's a very micro example. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
know. I came pretty late to Google Docs. It's more
Mhm.
recently. For some reason, I didn't like it at the beginning because I wanted to have the document on my computer, but I now love it for the
Mhm.
reasons that you say. And I'll say something just historically that's going to make me sound old, but when Joe Kahn and I used to
Mhm.
work together, first of all, we would like often be in the same room
Mhm.
and be, wordsmithing.
Mhm.
Together, which is just crazy. And it would, take us endless amounts of time, but we had fun. But we also, when we were separated geographically, we would mail diskettes back and forth
Wow.
using FedEx. Like we would FedEx
Wow.
diskettes to one another because there you couldn't electronically transfer a file. And, and
Oh
so
my
it
gosh.
was incredible, and I still have memories of that, and it seems so preposterous now. But somehow we did that.
That's a riot. And even calling it a diskette.
Yeah,
Another thing you have done that I've really admired, and I've tried to do it too, is public engagement, including a lot of media. And one gig you have that I envy is that you are what they call a radio columnist, which is very cool. Like you have a regular spot on the radio where you're able to give commentary on your area of expertise to the longstanding host. So the host is the reporter, asks you questions, and you talk about that. So in this case, your area of expertise, education, is so relevant to every single person, especially if you have kids. But if you don't have kids, how
yeah.
people are being educated, these are the next generation who's going to be taking care of us. So tell us how you got that gig. And I've been told by some friends to not use the word gig if the issue is very serious because it can seem to trivialize. But there are some things that you've talked about that are fun and funny, right? And other
Yeah.
things that are much more somber. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about the topics you cover and how you got into that.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things that I do, right? Once I started that, the favorite part of my career. Public speaking also, and you do a lot of public speaking, and I think we both enjoy that a lot. But
Yeah, I'm
that
going to
kind of,
ask you next about the public
okay,
speaking in front of a giant audience because I have
yeah.
some questions about that.
Okay. But the radio started because I was, called a bunch of times to speak on a particular topic, and you've been on the radio too, when they're looking for an expert in a certain field. And at some point I noticed that, like, okay, they were calling quite a bit, and I was on with some frequency. And I decided to write them and say,
Mhm.
hey, listen, do you want to do a regular, what they call column on this,
Mhm.
on education? These issues keep coming up,
Mhm.
and let's just do them regularly. There are enough issues. And they said, absolutely, this is a great idea. And
Mhm.
so that was many, many years ago, and I've been doing it ever since. And it's on the show you mentioned, Ottawa Morning, but Because of that, of course, I've also then been asked to be on other shows, Ontario Today, and national shows like Cross Country Checkup, and that's been, great. I really love it. It's just one of the favorite parts of my career. And any academic will tell you, you publish a peer-reviewed journal article and you sort of wonder what happens to it. It kind of goes into
Mhm.
a dark pit, and you kind of hope that someone in your family read it. Um, and
Exactly.
and radio is unbelievable because you put it out there, and for the next like 2 weeks, like everyone I run into, says, "Oh, I heard that segment." And strangers say it when I had no idea I have such a distinctive voice, but they hear my voice and say, "Are you that guy on the radio?" I mean, this is local stardom, let me say. This is not, any kind of grand celebrity, but I really love it. It connects me to the community, and it's a form of public education. It's educating the public, and people know very little about what schools are actually like from teachers and administrators' perspective. And the issues that come up, I think, are very important to have out there because education is so important to our society. And so I get a lot of professional satisfaction, not just with the medium, that's what I've been talking about so far, but with the results, which is, feeling like I'm doing a tiny bit to educate the public on these issues.
And do you have ongoing relationships with people in the schools since you're in at the university level, so you can kind of keep your finger on the pulse?
Yeah, it does give me connections with people in the school. I tried to do that anyway, and I visit classrooms, and I've been known also to, from time to time, call on former students who are teachers to let me
Mhm.
teach a class or two in their classroom so that I stay honest. Um, and yeah, it makes those connections for sure, and it makes it easier for me to call someone and say, "Can I do
Mhm.
this?"
Mhm.
So I've really appreciated that. It's a real honor to be able to do that kind of work.
Can I ask you about those two little letters that no one knows what to do with these days?
Oh my
And they're
God, I
both,
have no idea what you're going to say. Oh, AI. Yeah, for sure you can ask me about it. I mean,
what the heck are we supposed to do, Joel?
what are we supposed to do, Mira? The beginning of the AI thing, of course, there was, going back to the radio, like everyone wanted to talk about it. And what they wanted to talk about is, oh my God, how are teachers and professors going to deal with cheating? I mean, the
Right.
whole focus was cheating. And, that's a challenge for us in the way that schools and universities are structured. But one of the things I really wanted to say and do say is that in the big picture of things, rather than trying to prevent cheating, wouldn't it be great if we could redefine the incentives of education as being not to game the system, but to learn?
Mhm.
And so cheating would become irrelevant because if you want to learn, then you're not going to cheat. And that's a little pie in the sky, but I really mean it, right? How can we create incentives in our classrooms so that students don't want to take a shortcut or
Mhm.
get around it? Everyone is now saying in K-12 and university, well, it's here to stay, and so we gotta, you know, work with it. So, have
Mhm.
students do their first draft of a paper and then, critique that draft or edit that draft. I think that's very easy for all of us to say. We already know how to do this work. We
Right.
have no idea what the impact of starting with a 6-year-old and telling them that they can turn over everything to AI for the first draft
Right.
is very worrisome to me. And of course, the bigger picture of the AI impact on society would be the topic for another podcast, but that really
Yeah.
concerns me too. But going back to what you said, half jokingly, what are we supposed to do? I think it's very difficult. When I teach graduate students, I say, listen, you can use AI, and maybe there's some good ways to use it, but you're an adult and you're paying a lot of money and spending a crazy amount of time to be in this program. Like in some ways, if they want to, outsource all the work that they're supposed to do, I mean, why are they doing the programs? Like, pick a different line of work. And I tell them that, you're adults, make the decisions and do it. I don't want to participate in the arms race of detecting cheating. Yeah. What do you think of it?
I'm really stuck because I think that a lot of students don't necessarily go to learn, they go for the credential because you
Yeah.
need a credential to work and earn a living and be a productive member of society and feed yourself. I don't judge them for that. And so if it's primarily to get the credential, then taking the shortcuts is absolutely would absolutely be enticing. But when you were saying to incentivize it so that they want to learn, it really made me think of sports. And no teenage basketball player would want a machine to do their layup for them. They
Right.
want to sink that basket and they want it on video and they want to put it on TikTok. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you. If that is possible, then that's the pot I want to invest in. I'm going to
Yeah.
keep talking to you about that in the future.
Yeah, and the idea that some students won't experience the absolute, bliss
Mhm.
of coming up with that perfect sentence or engaging intellectually with readings, um, that's a sad loss because it really is can sometimes be incredible. But the other thing we should say is that, like you said, if students are doing it for the degree, but even if they're not, the pressure on students, on university students these days is immense. I mean, so many are, especially because of inadequate funding, so many are holding down part-time or full-time jobs. They have huge pressures in their lives. And so shortcuts seem almost irresistible, right? And so the other thing we should pay attention to is the bigger picture, where we should provide students with an environment where they can focus on their education.
Yeah. We're almost out of time. I wanted to ask you about public speaking. We talked about it really briefly before. You speak to big audiences at times, bigger than the typical academic would speak to an academic conference. You get invited by large organizations.
I speak sometimes to large groups of teachers and also public lectures, which can sometimes be big. And like I was on a panel for CBC Ideas, which is, a huge audience. But the biggest ones for sure are the teacher conferences.
Right. So tell us. So I have a very specific question for you. You, like me, you're very interactive and spontaneous, and you like thinking on your feet. Are you able to pull off that style in what seems to be a very formal setting? And I'm thinking that the larger it is, the more formal it is. Or how do you manage to be yourself when it's such a big place,
Yeah.
big podium?
First of all, I almost never use PowerPoint.
Okay.
Um, I find it sort of, slow death by PowerPoint, like you see people's eyes glaze over. I'll
Hmm.
use it at an academic conference only if I have to present data, because,
Hmm.
you can't like read off data. And
Right.
so I'll put that kind of thing up. Or if I want to use multimedia of some kind,
Hmm.
so you use it for something that you can't do without it. But
Right.
the downside of not using PowerPoint is, of course, and you might have this too, and trying to think on your feet and be fresh, is that you have to reinvent the talk every time.
Hmm.
You don't have it on a thumb drive or online or something. You have to reinvent every time, even though you've done the talk before or similar talk. Um, I the research I do before a talk is what the local context is and what the examples of things that I want to talk about are in that local context, because I want to
Mm.
know things about that particular audience. And that helps me think on my feet because I
Hmm.
have those examples and discussions and conversations in my mind.
Hmm.
Um, and I like, you know, walking around the stage and doing it. I'll
Hmm.
have notes and I will glance at notes when I need to. It's more pressure not having
Hmm.
it perfectly, laid out or not reading it.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so much more rewarding, and I think it's
Hmm.
a way to engage with your audience in a different way.
Hmm. Nice. And it seems to pay off and work because you keep getting invited back.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you can do it, of course, people like those kind of more engaging things. We're trained as academics to kind of have a formal paper and read them. But even I find that boring, so
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
try and avoid it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're teachers, we're pedagogues, but then we lose that entire sense of educating and dialogue when we're in professional spaces. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
bring that back in, and
Yeah.
you are too.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and
Joel,
you have this great opportunity because you have been doing the series of lectures with someone else, and talk about collaboration. Like that's super exciting. And then you have a back and forth that probably makes what we're talking about easier.
yes, and so with my research partner and close friend Omar Dajani, and what we've done there so that we can be interactive without having to write an elaborate script is that we prepare some questions which we give to a moderator and ask the moderator pose questions to each of us, and then we can interject if we want, but otherwise it moves pretty smoothly, sort of like we're on Oprah or
Yeah.
that kind of feeling. So I enjoy that too.
Yeah.
Joel, it's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot. I've reflected a lot. I'm really going to think about what you said about incentivizing students so that cheating is just simply less pleasurable and less desirable. I think that's our goal for the next decade.
Well, this has been great, Mira, and I'll see you at the cafe.
Fantastic. I'll be there in my regular spot.
All right. Take care.
Take care, Joel. Thank you.
Bye.
The Peer Review podcast is produced and hosted by Sarah Bunin-Benor and Mira Sukharov. Talia Ehrenberg is assistant producer and editor. The music is written and performed by the Galactic Ambassadors. Support for this podcast comes from a faculty grant from Hebrew Union College. If you would like to sponsor an episode, you can reach us at peerreview@huc.edu. You can join the conversation on Facebook at Peer Review, Cultivating Creativity and Fulfillment in Academia. Thank you for listening.